Welcome back, folks, to AI FYI, your friendly neighborhood podcast for all things AI. Today, we have a very exciting topic. I think something that uh, maybe we're not very familiar with, and we're all kind of learning together a little bit. But love and AI, or AI and relationships, AI girlfriends, AI boyfriends. All right, I'm going to try that again. Welcome back, folks, to another episode of AI FYI. We are your hosts, Kieran, Andy, and Joe, and we are your friendly neighborhood podcast for all things AI. If you want to learn about AI, if you want to know how it's impacting your life, come on down and listen to AI FYI for all of your AI needs. Today, at an AI FYI, we are talking about love and AI. So we may have seen this, may have heard of this, but how is AI impacting our relationships and, more importantly, the love that we have for other people? Okay, I'm going to try that one more time.
Also, I'm not sure how much we're talking about like human to human relationships. I feel like we're going to be focused very exclusively on like
The love robots.
virtual relationships. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
At
I
least
did
that's what
like
I looked into.
both of the takes you already did of calling us your friendly neighborhood AI podcast. Because
Uh,
we are.
yeah, I like the
we're way
friendly
cuter than
neighborhood.
the other
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Take 3. Welcome back, folks, to your friendly neighborhood AI. No.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to AI FYI, your friendly neighborhood podcast all about AI and machine learning and how it impacts you. We're your hosts, Kieran, Joe, and Andy. Kieran's a software developer and a human-computer interaction engineer. Joe's a product designer with a bunch of machine learning experience. I'm a product manager who's been working in AI for a decade. Between the three of us, we're kind of your local AI experts. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is super cute and super weird. Kieran, tell them about it.
We're talking about AI and relationships. So you may have heard about this in the past. You may have seen this in pop culture. But what is it like to date an AI robot?
And we're going to be talking about some research, sort of what's the state of these applications, how are they healthy, how are they unhealthy, and we'll be talking about the technology as well. So what is some of the machine learning and artificial intelligence technology happening behind the scenes, a little bit about the history, and we'll talk a little bit about what's coming down the road and what's next and what some of these teams that are building AI chatbots, what they're focusing on for the future.
We have a lot of content for you guys. This is actually going to be a 2-parter. So this is the first of 2 parts that we're going to go into AI and romance. We're going to talk about some examples of real world AI relationships, types of AI that people actually interact with to replace or enhance a romantic type relationship, and maybe dig into some of the dirty, exciting, juicy details of these AI relationships. So to start off, I did want to talk about a few examples of AI relationships in pop culture. So this is something, many of us are familiar with. We've all seen TV shows, we've all seen movies where there's some sort of AI romance or relationship. As we were doing our research for this episode, the first one that actually came up to me is something that is very near and dear to me, to my childhood. SpongeBob SquarePants. If you guys have not heard of SpongeBob SquarePants, this is a classic cartoon from the late 90s, early 2000s. They still have shows, but I will say season 1, 2, and 3, those are the OGs. So if you haven't seen SpongeBob, watch season 1, 2, and 3. They are actually
Kieran,
surprisingly
if you do not
insightful.
edit in the little like intro music to SpongeBob at the beginning of your section, I'm going to be mad at you.
I wonder how that works with like trademark or copyright.
Doesn't matter. We're not getting in trouble. We have 5 listeners.
Yeah. So, what example I wanted to start with of AI romance in pop culture is SpongeBob SquarePants, which is a hilarious cartoon from the late 90s, early 2000s about an underwater city called Bikini Bottom with a yellow sponge is the main character. SpongeBob SquarePants is a character that goes through all these crazy journeys and adventures underwater with a bunch of his friends. And one of those characters, his name is Plankton. And Plankton is the evil genius that is always trying to steal the formula for the Krabby Patty from the Krusty Krab, which is SpongeBob's work establishment. Um, and Plankton has a competing restaurant called the Chum Bucket. And Plankton also has an AI wife. So in the show, Plankton has a big computer in his lab that he frequently talks to and actually refers to as his wife. And this robot is just a big screen where you see like radio waves when the robot talks, and they have all these interesting conversations of how they love each other, how they have dinners together, how she or he aren't bringing as much as they need to the table in the relationship, and they get into fights and quirky discussions. And to me, I didn't realize it growing up, but this is an example of AI in romance, and Plankton's wife is an AI robot, which is very
If any
interesting
of
to think
you
about.
needed any more evidence that Kieran is an engineer, just look at the fact that he described the entire premise of SpongeBob SquarePants like you didn't already know it. He had to really zoom out and talk about the details before he talked about Plankton's computer wife.
If you're not a SpongeBob OG, I'm telling you, I got all the apparel. It's what it is. I grew up on SpongeBob.
But you're right. I have watched SpongeBob, and I know that Plankton's wife is a computer, but it never occurred to me that that was like supposed to be kind of a representation of AI, of artificial intelligence, because she does argue with him.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like she's completely sentient. It appears in the show as if she would just be another character. It just so happens that she's a computer. But all the conversations, everything that she does is very much human like. And yeah, this is one example. So getting into other examples, I think you start to go in a lot of different directions. So there is cases like Westworld. If you haven't seen Westworld, again, the premise is there's this theme park with a whole bunch of animatronics, but these animatronics are really, really good. And so that feels like they're actual humans. And humans will go visit this theme park and do all kinds of things. And they'll go on these adventures. And, part of it is they can, ride horses around and, have get into battles and, gunfights like the Wild West. But part of it is also meeting significant others or having relationships with some of the robots in this world. And again, these robots at times will feel very human like, but there are also cases throughout the series where you see like bugs come up. So the robot might not properly process what someone is saying. It might not say something that is completely coherent. And there's cases where you see throughout the series that these are in fact robots and they're not humans. And so it makes this really interesting dichotomy between the human to human relationships and the human to robot relationships, and then even the robot to robot relationships, which I don't want to have any spoilers, but as you go through the series, there's some very interesting
So
interactions
I
there.
haven't seen that show. Are they like self-aware, the AI people in Westworld? Do they know
Um,
that they're AI?
I think that will probably be like the plot of the show is answering that. As the
Spoiler
seasons,
alert, just tell me.
yeah, as the seasons go on, you can say that perhaps they become more aware. And
Mm.
I would say they reflect on what is a difference between a human and a robot. what is it about us that makes us different?
So both those examples in SpongeBob and Westworld, the AI is like hyper realistic. Like the machine is very human like. Uh, and I was just thinking about the show that I watched when I was younger called Dollhouse, which I'm not even sure if this counts as AI. The premise of Dollhouse is that there are people who like sign up to contract. I'm going to call it a brothel. They call it the Dollhouse, and people can request and design a personality, and it gets loaded into somebody's body with fake memories. Then they like take that person out for a joyride, and then they get returned to the dollhouse, reset, and loaned out again. Um, and whether the personalities are definitely sentient, human like, and not aware that they are not real people. So it kind of feels like murder every time somebody's erased in my mind. I can't think of an example in popular media where people are dating not hyper realistic artificial intelligence.
So the it is interesting because I think there's different facets of it, right? There's like the humanoid like body, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the, interacting with that. And in SpongeBob, it's literally a computer. So he will refer to his robot wife, and like when you see it, it's like it's literally just a computer. I think there is an episode where she has like a mobile body, but it's still very
Mm-hmm.
much like a robot. Versus Westworld, they are trying to simulate like these are humans, right? They have like the full anatomy, and you get into the whole lust side of it and all of that. And they're trying to simulate like, hey, these are real people. But then what gets interesting is, spoiler alert, skip the next 30 seconds if you watch Westworld. um, but right as it goes further into the series, like Joe was saying, right, they start to become more aware, and they're like, and the show essentially, it's like a loop, right? It's a theme park, so the same series of events will happen over and over. And so the robots, if a robot was just a robot, it wouldn't realize it's doing the same loop. But some of the robots start to remember, like, hey, I think I've done this before. And then they start to question those things, and they realize that they're just in this loop. And so, like, how do they get out of that loop? And then it becomes this, interesting kind of like murder type, like, hey, you are killing my friends, but they're just robots. And there's a lot of, yeah, it's very interesting how they get through that.
I'm watching a show right now. I believe it's new. It's an anime show on Netflix called Pluto, and it takes place in a future where robots live amongst humans. They've actually been given rights, and a big plot device is that there are different versions of robots. Meaning, you might have a really old model that looks like a robot and is like very close to looking like a computer, that is married to like a human or married to another robot. And then some robots are just so advanced and like further along versions that they are almost indistinguishable from humans, and they play with that a lot. Sort of, what do robots look like in an evolving world where maybe there are some that were created years ago that don't look like today's modern robots.
Mhm.
Today meaning in their future or in their present.
Mhm.
I'm just remembering a show from some BBC thing. I don't know if this sounds familiar to you guys. It's about a near future where there's these hyper realistic humanoid robots. And I remember one of the big plot points is they're hired out as family assistants, they're rented, but like, this is gonna get crude. The dads keep having sex with them against, like, without anybody knowing, like turning on the erotic mode when the family's not around. And I'm like, that's a big thing in our culture, right? Is this idea that like AI can give you something that you want that maybe other people can't. That's one of the allures, is that they will like be your perfect partner, crafted to you. That's the premise of Dollhouse, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
and
they don't have
her,
consent in some sense. Yeah.
yeah, her is another movie. So in this movie, right, they have this AI, this new AI that comes out, and you're able to, download and interact with the version of it. And it starts with like, okay, this is just a voice on a screen, but then later on, you do see they have a hologram. So they simulate this hologram, of a lady that is having a conversation and discussing with him. And he it's interesting because he starts out just interacting with the voice, and that was enough for him. But then you get this hologram of a woman, and he starts to get attached to that, and then as the movie kind of goes on, he has this he has a struggle because the hologram can only live inside of the house and can't go outside. And so he's always talking to her on the phone when he's out of the house, and then when he's in
Mm-hmm.
the house, he's interacting with this hologram. And then he eventually gets this device that allows him to go outside and kind of take that hologram with him. And it's just interesting how their relationship kind of develops throughout the movie, and eventually gets to this place where it's like, we are different, right? And we can't ever have like that next level of connection that you would want between.
That's interesting. I'm going to go into the research in a little bit, but there's research that shows the more human like a virtual agent is, the more people anthropomorphize it. I'll define that in a second, and they get more attached. So it makes sense to me that these shows are following that pattern. So for a long time in media, as soon as a human lifelike robot, which has an inherent AI component, artificial intelligence component, is on screen, the next scene is like somebody trying to have sex with it or romanticizing it, right? That was the case in Blade Runner. I'm sure there's movies from the 40s, 50s. This has been part of like our psyche for a long time.
Mhm. Even Ex Machina, where it's like they're trying to create this AI, humanoid AI, and it's not about a relationship, but there are erotic components of the show or of the movie, just by nature of that humanoid robot having a female physique appearance, versus having a male appearance. And again, you kind of go through the show and you see that humans are really creepy people, and in this case there's like a creepy dude trying to make all these women robots. And it's yeah, it's a very interesting world and reflection, I think, of humans that we see in these pop culture shows.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think every example we talked about, it was a like female presenting robot. And yeah, a lot of the plots of these things are sexual in nature or maybe imbalanced.
We're at this turning point in our culture where these things aren't just in movies. Now there's apps you can get that are specifically trying to offer this to us today.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about this. So we just talked about a bunch of examples that exist in sci-fi. I think robots, relationships with robots are a big thing you're going to find all over in sci-fi and books, movies, TV shows, everywhere. But we're not quite there yet with a lot of this stuff. Right now, interacting with robots in a romantic way largely exists in the realm of chatbots. We're going to be talking about a few examples in a minute. I wanted to talk a little bit about actually something when we decided we were going to do this episode. Something I was tasked with was to actually go and try and date a robot. And I did try out a few. I'm going to talk about that experience of trying out different ones. But I actually had like a little bit of an ethical quandary. So I have a boyfriend, and one of our rules is that we don't have other emotional relationships. Like we remain each other's primary relationship. And I think that if you really set out to develop a relationship with an AI, that would actually be in violation of those rules. And so it was a piece of why I decided not to. The other piece is that I didn't have a lot of time this week because I was on vacation. So I'm going to blame both of those things. But it did cross my mind, like, is this cheating in a way? And I think the answer is yes, because like, what is a relationship or an emotional relationship if not like becoming vulnerable with someone or something? Um, so yeah, and that's how a lot of these how a lot of people are using AI chatbots in a romantic way or an emotional way these days is finding them online and then having conversations with them.
It's actually really interesting when you say that you do feel like it's cheating, because that statement itself is humanizing that AI that much more. Because it's like, if you think about a video game or something, like some people could have, you could claim an emotional attachment to a game or a toy or inanimate, not lifelike things. And we don't necessarily say that, if I'm playing this video game 30 hours a week, like I'm not cheating on my wife with the game. My wife might be frustrated that I'm spending all my time with this game, but it wouldn't necessarily be considered that. Versus now it's designed to interact with you, maybe in a romantic way. It's still a machine, but now the fact that it's designed for that purpose now applies or adds that additional human like characteristic, which now we're saying might be cheating, which is interesting.
And yeah, I thought about it in terms of like the energy I give to a relationship, meaning like relying on another person for me to share with, like to share my vulnerabilities or to share what I'm going through. That would then be directed to something else, almost sort of like replacing something or somebody that already serves that purpose in my life, or that I make sure to like reserve that kind of energy for. We're really getting into it now.
Mhm.
But that was just some of my thinking with this. Like if I really were to set out and do this, and it worked, it's almost like it's almost like the same decision to go and like date another real person when
And
you
it's
already have
interesting
one.
to me, when we were planning this episode, I was like, oh, Kieran's going to research popular media. I'm going to research the research. Joe, you go date a robot. And I was like, is Abhishek going to be okay with this? And you were like, yeah, it's fine. And then you stopped and thought about it and realized I'm not okay with it. It's just like,
yeah, I'm not okay with it if these chatbots are effective
yeah.
as partners. Yeah.
And I bet a bunch of people kind of go through that same step that we did, which is like, at first it was like, yeah, it's harmless if Joe tries to get an AI boyfriend. And then like you stop and think about it a second, like, is it really? You just kind of like, you could slide into it without thinking about it critically on accident.
Mm-hmm.
So let me jump into a couple options that are out there. And I did play around with some, and I sort of thought, like, what if I was trying to get an AI boyfriend? Would these be suitable? So what's out there? A really popular one is Replica. And this one actually kind of reminded me of like The Sims. You sort of go in, you create an avatar, and it's your buddy. It sort of even told me this is the first time it's talked to a human. And can be a friend, it can be a romantic partner, it can be many different things. So with this one, they've gamified it a little bit. There are like experience points the more you interact with it. It sort of has an interesting way to track memory and things that you tell it that it relies on. It has a lot of pro features. Those include like changing your avatar's appearance. You can actually do voice calls with it on the pro plan. And then explicit roles, like a romantic role other than a friend role. For some time, this service did have not safe for work content, but it's been taken away. So that was something that was controversial enough for them to remove. This is one of the most well-known chatbots that are out there right now. But a competitor has come along called Character AI, created by two former Google researchers. And this actually allows you to talk to an array of different chatbots. So you can sort of choose the one you want. Some are modeled off of celebrities or well-known personalities. I tried this out. I talked to a chatbot. I forget the name, but self-described, not really available and into soccer was its descriptive text.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is interesting because you might sit down and look at your options and say, I do want like an avoidant relationship, like someone who's only going to half pay attention to me.
And that's interesting because the personalities are like, instead of you having to fantasize and make up your ideal person, you get the charm of like, real people are complicated. They have pros and cons. And if they're replicating real people that could exist, that's kind of a little layer.
The AI is playing hard to get.
Yes. And I want to talk a little bit more about that in my experience. One thing that was really interesting with this chatbot and this persona in particular was, in addition to having a conversation with it, every message came with context. So it would be like in italics, like so and so barely takes his eyes off of his computer screen as the soccer game continues. And then it gives what is provided. And at one point, it described the chatbot getting up from its chair to come over and talk to me. So there was like blocking and actual like stage direction, which
Whoa.
if you're in for the fantasy and the story, that's really cool because it adds uh, deeper context to the narrative, not just like imagining you're talking to a server somewhere.
It's like helping paint a
Wow.
setting for you so that you can feel that more of that real life interaction.
That's right.
Somebody tell the romance novel girlies on TikTok. They'll go nuts.
It
Yeah.
was, it actually reminded me of a romance novel. I even think it was like describing the weather outside. Like it's a dark, rainy night. Like your boyfriend is sitting at the computer watching the soccer game while you're on the couch, like behind him. That was the setup, which paints a picture. And, you know, a thousand, you know, whatever the saying is, a picture paints a thousand words. Okay. So there's more that are popping up. There's a couple of other services, one called Chai, Peridot, and Soulmate are others I saw that are common. We're also seeing, so just in the past couple of weeks, it feels like OpenAI is getting into this game with the ability to create customized versions of ChatGPT that could be used for something like a romantic partner. And then big players like Google Bard and Meta as well have chatbots out now. I know Meta is trying their hand at these different persona chatbots, many of them based off of celebrities. And then Google Bard. Some of these are probably really hard to have a relationship with, but they are options and could form into something that is more, available as less of a personal assistant and more an emotional relationship.
It's interesting to me how much effort humans are putting into creating not just like there's the romance aspect, but I think generally, like companions for humans with machines. And I think it speaks to, again, part of what I've actually been having this discussion with my wife separately from all of this, but just how social media and, the way that the world has been moving today has really been separating people, right? We have like, oh, Facebook connects people and, all these apps to,
Mm-hmm.
get you closer to your friends, but it's like, it's actually really disconnecting, because everything I'm doing is through a screen. Yesterday I had a Friendsgiving and, we all just brought food and had a potluck and hung out and played games. And it's like, there's nothing I've ever done online that could simulate that sort of interaction with people. But there's a lot of people that don't have those types of options or interactions in their lifestyle. And so we're now creating this sort of facade with machines. So people have that type of interaction and stimulation that they get from other. So I don't know. It's just really interesting to me that this is such an important part of human life that we're actually spending significant amount of resources like open AI, which is like the, leading generative NLP model, is like trying to figure out like how can we help, people get companions, whether it's romance or friendship or whatever it is.
Um, we kind of, I asked myself, like, have I ever been in a romantic relationship with an AI? I thought about it and I realized I haven't, even though I've had a lot of opportunities. So there's a video game out there called Stardew Valley where you like, it's really cute and simple. You play a little farmer and it's like a farming simulation and you can go make a bunch of different choices and interact with all the members of the community. And I always get like really invested in getting all the little Junimo spirit things to work for me. Joe cross stitched me a custom Junimo for my birthday a couple years ago. It was really cute. Um, and in the game, you have the option of romancing any of the characters, and eventually you can give them like a seashell necklace, and then they can marry and they'll make kids, and that they help you at the farm. But even though I've logged an absurd amount of hours into this game, according to Steam, we're talking hundreds. of hours, if not thousands. I've never romanced any of the characters. And when I go onto like the forums or whatever, because I'm trying to figure out how to get the like special pickaxe or whatever, so many people are really invested in their relationships with the little avatars and people and who they're romancing, and they'll play through multiple times to have different marriages. And that just like was never of interest to me. Um, Part of the reason for that, and I don't know if this is true, is like I do have a pretty rich personal social life. I have a loving family. I've got great friends. So I don't like when I play video games, I'm just kind of like vegetating, and it's a little bit meditative for me, and like it's fun, but I don't need it to necessarily like fill a social hole for me. And it might be actually messed up of me to even think that only people who use AI, like these little avatars, are filling gaps that they experience in natural life. But that's actually the premise of like all the research that I did. So if you guys are down, I'll explain.
I am kind of right there with you. Everything that's been said, like these chatbots didn't really do it for me, and it'd be hard to imagine that they would if I was looking for a real relationship. I am also someone who has real relationships in my life, so uh, some people might this might be enough for them. For me, it's not something I'm about to rely on. But there were a few things that tell you these aren't humans. They would make up weird responses sometimes. Right off the bat, they make it very clear that they're there to serve you or to be more of a personal assistant. Very different from how like a friendship or a real relationship would form. And so I would say, broadly speaking, it all felt a little too low stakes to be like a real relationship. There is the fact that you're trying to enter into a relationship with something that like cannot leave, which I think is a big part of real relationships. Is you can go up to someone and they can walk away, like a human can walk away from you, but
Mhm.
these chatbots are always going to be there, and so it doesn't actually foster real vulnerability or like real trust. And that's something I don't think I could easily like forget about when I'm interacting with these. Something else that I thought about is that a lot of these chatbots have guardrails, and we get into a little bit of a tricky subject here because we don't want to have chatbots that are dangerous or spread misinformation or use certain language, or spread conspiracy theories. I mean, you name it, chatbots can get pretty horrible. But I do think that there is something like very raw about um, human connection and the humans that we interact with in a way that like clicks with your personality, and like especially in a romantic relationship, there are secrets in it and ways that you talk only with that partner, or things that you might say that aren't really nice. And like I just don't really see any chatbots currently that like go there. I'm having a hard time explaining that, but hopefully.
No, I think I mean I get what you're saying, and again, for me, right, with my wife, we fight about things all the time. We critique each other on different things, and I think those challenges are things that have helped me grow as an individual in our relationship, and that's really something that, at least again personally, I'm looking for in a relationship, is this other person is going to help me improve over time and become
Mm-hmm.
a better person. And yeah, again, I haven't interacted very much with AI girlfriend or chatbot in that way, but to me that would be a big challenge, right? Is how much is this machine or this individual, if you want to call them, right, going to challenge you and your opinions versus being like a yes man or yes woman to say like, okay, cool, yeah, you are great and amazing, and I'm here for you. uh,
And I'll just say that at least two of the three of us are pretty much domain experts in natural language models. And this is a technology that, like, I believe we're very close to being able to do the prompt engineering. We'll explain what that is in a second to make that kind of challenging relationship possible.
Yeah.
Will it meet the needs of the average person? I don't know. I suspect not. but we'll see. So I had kind of like approached this as like, how did we get here? How did we get to um, this sudden kind of like gold rush of apps popping up that are trying to be somebody's boyfriend or girlfriend or partner or whatever? And I was like, opened up my laptop and I pulled up archive and all these paper repositories, and I was like, I'm gonna get the dirt and I'm gonna find out that like when you date a robot, you're like 40% less cool, something. And that's not what happened at all, actually. I found this statement that I was like, Currently, much remains to be known about our social relationship with virtual avatars. Very nice way to sum up that, like, the tech is far ahead of our understanding of the tech in some sense. So just like we accidentally gave Gen Z cell phones and internet access at a very young age, and now we're realizing that might not have been very good for their childhood development, some of that is happening with these virtual agents. Lots of people are having daily interactions with these things, but like there is no research. And it makes sense because there's ethical considerations about doing research on people's romantic lives and getting them to fall in love with, trying to get them to fall in love with a chatbot. Like, good luck getting that approved. And the tech is just moving faster than like the scientists studying the impact of the tech can study. But I'll pull up what I read a bunch and I kind of synthesized it into a little story for myself. I will tell that story in a couple parts now. So, what we're discussing about when it comes to love and AI is anthropomorphism. And anthropomorphism is a big word that means the attribution of human traits, emotions, and intentions to non human entities. And you can do this with a bunch of stuff, right? Like, you could, when you think that your dog has people personalities and values, you're anthropomorphizing your dog. If you say your toaster looks sad, you're anthropomorphizing your toaster. I've definitely done this. Every time I see a car, I look at their headlights and their grill and I'm like, it's a happy car, it's a sad car. Like, that's part of the aesthetic of a car for me.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the show BoJack Horseman, it's a anthropomorphic world where all the animals can have human-like
Yeah.
characteristics.
And there's an inverse process, just to note, that anthropomorphism can also be the dehumanization of humans, right? Like, these things are not always correlated, not at all, but you can think of it as like, if people are able to look at a cute little microphone and be like, oh, it's like a cute little baby, and then they can look at a person and be like, you're like a robot, and like detract from their human value. Our brains can do that. Okay, it's called anthropomorphism. So how did we get here? Well, a big talk for a few years now is that men are hella lonely. We talked about how a whole bunch of like the popular media sees the AIs as being women and men as the customers. There's some truth to that because so the Pew Research Center 2022 study found that 30% of US adults are not married, living with a partner, or in any kind of committed relationship. Half of young adults are single. And the data is really weird. It's 34% of young women and 63% of young men are single. They're trying to figure out why that gap is so big. Part of it's like younger women are dating older men. Younger women are dating each other more. Like, there's reasons why they have that. They also looked into it and said that 15% of men report having no close friendships, which is 5 times higher than it was in 1990.
Wow.
So if you think about it, 6 in 10 young men ages 18 to 30 are single.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bummer.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I mean, that just makes me sad for our society, right? Like, relationships are wonderful, especially when you're ages 18 to 30. You grow so much from partnerships you have. You learn so much from the people you're dating. And that 6 out of 10 young men just don't have that at all. It's sad.
Mm-hmm.
There's also research that lonely people are more likely to anthropomorphize. So I came across a study where they made this like little robot called Floby, and they had like a control group and a test group, and they asked people to self-identify their loneliness, and they also tried to quantify loneliness. And they found that like the lonelier you are, the more likely you were to anthropomorphize this robot you were interacting with. Interesting, right? Kind of makes sense. But then I found another paper that built off of that lonely people are more likely to anthropomorphize robots the more they look like people. So this study put like three robots. One was just like a little rectangle. One was like one of the little robot dogs, and one was like a little like humanoid object, and studied people interacting with them. And I'm going to quote it. Bootstrap multiple regression results revealed that although the unique effect of animal likeness on anthropomorphism compared to human likeness was higher, lonely individuals' tendency to anthropomorphize the animal-like robot was lower than that of the human-like robot. So, putting that into plain English, if you're not that lonely, you really like the robot dog because it's just cute and kind of reminds you of a dog. If you are lonely, you really like the robot person, and you anthropomorphize it way more than the not lonely person does the dog. There's a table that showed this, like little charts, and I was like, oh man. And get this, if you are lonely and you're participating in anthropomorphizing, you are more likely to spend money. They also, in these studies, ask people, like, what's your likelihood to spend on these robots and stuff? So it comes as no surprise that Google Trends shows there's a 2,400% increase in like 3 years in search interest for AI girlfriends.
Wow.
It makes sense, right? If we have a whole bunch of lonely ass men, and the research kind of shows, even as nascent as it is showing that lonely people are vulnerable to ascribing human attributes to digital objects. There's a lot of money to be made.
So I'm
Taking
curious then, like, what you think is, like, what's the future here? Do we think that now 60% of men are just going to be in relationships with, AI, and that's like the reality moving forward? Or do you think there's going to be some trend to combat that, whatever that might be? I don't even know how you would go about like forcing women to date men, or like forcing men to go find physical human interactions. I don't know.
well, both Joe and I, and all three of us, said that, like, when we've tried to interact with these creatures, I'm calling creatures, these AIs, they don't scratch the itch for us. And we come from privileged positions where we're not lonely, I don't say, the three of us. I can't fault any lonely person for trying to soothe their loneliness, but like on aggregate, this is not good for our society. We'll talk more about pros and cons there. I wonder what's going to happen with the tech, because all these researchers, like, I found somebody's doctoral thesis about this where she said, like, first there's an issue of consent. The technologies create to respond to us, but to date they're not created to disagree with us. As our connection with these technologies becomes more intimate, i.e. sex, robots, female characters in video games, and haptic technologies in VR, the issue of lack of consent becomes an issue. This leads to the second ethical issue, machine consciousness, which raises awareness in the importance of how humans treat technology they're interacting with. The ethical implications are important to consider, since we live in a world where the non-human coexists with us. They're active social players, and they must be treated as such.
Mm-hmm.
This was a doctoral thesis for somebody, so they're probably about 24 to 26 years old, and they're thinking about this, and they spent their time. I highly doubt that the developers of all these startups trying to make AI bots are thinking about, do I need to worry about the consent of the bot? Yeah. I'm just going to go on the record that I don't think we're ever going to achieve this sort of consciousness where we really have to worry about, like, is the bot consenting? But I think it hurts people when they anthropomorphize an AI and then dehumanize it by treating it poorly. I think that's damaging to the person participating in that process.
Mm-hmm.
Being nice to robots, one, being nice to your LLM makes it perform better, and two, it makes you a better person. Say please and thank you to Siri. Please and thank you.
Yeah.
I do want to mention, when I was trying out different chatbots, they do have pricing structures in place where it's pay to play, or you get more features if you pay. replica, I think, was like $8 a month, or you can pay $50 a year. And that's not nothing. There are comparable like subscription services to digital content. And so assuming they've done their market research, people will pay for performance of these things or fully featured
Yeah, I mean, within
experiences.
about 90 minutes of online research, granted, I'm better at researching than the average person, but I was able to find papers that prove that this is a vulnerable population.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large vulnerable population that data shows you can put anthropomorphic AIs in front of them and ask for money.
Mm-hmm.
Little comic relief, if you guys are ready for it. I was cracking up at the titles of this research paper, so I'm going to read you a couple because they're very funny. Some of them are very responsible, so I'll skip those. You are never lonely with a robot, a qualitative content analysis on the use of anthropomorphic technologies. Social robots as companions for lonely hearts, the role of anthropomorphism in robotic appearance. Virtually in love, the role of anthropomorphism in virtual romantic relationships. Loneliness makes the heart grow fonder, of robots, on the effect of loneliness on psychological anthropomorphism. I was just cracking up.
It's actually wild that all of them have this component of loneliness or companionship, or the fact that we just want something to interact with as humans. So it is like there's a purpose that we're creating these things. It's not just because, it's like this novel, cool thing. People are actually trying to solve a real problem that humans are having.
And what's interesting to me is, as I was researching this, there were two types of like major families of papers, like two departments in the university. The human-computer interaction nerds, the U's of the world, Kieran, were like, this is a real problem. People are experiencing loneliness, and these virtual agents could be a way to treat that problem, which I think is a valid take. And then there was the like sociology, psychology camp who are like, people are vulnerable to falling in love with robots, and this is a big problem for those people in our society, which I think is also a good take. But that was kind of the main. But again, the tech is far ahead of where the actual understanding of its impacts are currently. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I think this does get into, larger conversations we've had on the pod about like, this is another technology, and it really is about how we choose to wield it. It can be used for good and bad. It just takes some consideration of safety. And it's heartening to hear that there is research happening and that there are common themes popping up, particularly around loneliness, so that, as we go invent the future, it's going to remain top of mind, or we have started to identify the pitfalls that we need to address. All right, so that wraps up our part 1 on AI and love and relationships. So we're excited to talk more about these different topics. We're going to get into a whole nother set of topics on this larger topic. So stay tuned. But for now, you can find us on anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please listen, rate, share, and subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. Please email us at aifyipod@gmail.com. And we'd love to hear from you on what to talk about in future episodes. So until then, thanks again for joining, and we'll talk to you later.
Bye.
See ya.